And again, this is first come, first serve. I'd like to start here and offer up here that there seems to be general consensus on the need to recruit a more diverse student body and to create more inclusive environments in architecture schools. Having now spent 2 full days immersed in discussions about these very issues, what might you see as the impediments to achieving these goals, or this goal, more inclusive environment in architecture schools? What might be impediments?
Well, we had a good conversation about that in today's session, and we saw a lot of that as being the accreditation issues, right? The silos that we get in between not only our different fields, architecture, landscape architecture, urban planning. How do we cross-list classes? How do we allow credit to count for those? We have so many things that we have to fit in for the accreditation that we really can't fit in those other programs to allow for that, let alone bring in other groups from other schools, other programs, other colleges, and include that.
Well, and as a follow-up, right, it appears that NAB is going to loosen up the structure, the framework of its accrediting, of its criteria, right? So within what we anticipate to be a much looser framework, right?
Hopefully.
Right, but where we have a little bit of flexibility, right? Maybe we could turn this around and say, how might this open up opportunities, right? What might be how would you take advantage of that?
So before we go there, though, I think there's one thing that we didn't talk a lot about directly, which is you won't get diverse students if you don't have diverse faculty. I mean, if you don't have that reflected in the faculty, how can you possibly go out and convince students and student parents? I think this is the other critical person in the room is parents. How can you convince them that there's going to be an environment in which their children are going to be able to flourish, or to convince a student that they're going to see faces that they can relate to? So I think opening the conversation more directly in dealing with this in our own body, right, meaning the faculty body, is really critical. And that means changing our hiring practices. If we're going to talk about diversity, we need to really open that discussion in ways that might be uncomfortable for people, right? I asked one of my colleagues, who's the head of the history department, what he thought. He's African American. I said, what do you think we need to do in order to get, people to apply, African Americans, anything, any insight you can offer? And he said, have them meet with African American faculty from the university. Have them go out to dinner. Have them meet with them, right? And the question I asked, I said, do you think that's too obvious? Like, it's a funny thing, right? I'm thinking, is that too dark? He said, no. Actually, if I'm going to move to a community, I want to know that there are going to be other people who have a shared experience so I can have a conversation with. I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. Same thing I do. I mean, right? This is not, we just need to be able to have this conversation to get past the barriers that keep us from figuring out what's wrong. And I remember as a chair in a university where there were, out of 90 departments, there were 5 women who were chairs. And at one point, they decided to have a big diversity discussion. And we're sitting in the group with the provost and all the chairs. And it's like, we've got to do diversity. But then there was this conversation about, but we're doing pretty well. I put up my hand and I'm like, no, we're not. Look at the room, right? Let's have this discussion more directly. So I'm all for students, being diverse, but until we get some of the front door, until we get the front of the house sort of figured out, it's going to be hard to do that, I think.
Let me just add on. to add on to that a little bit, I do think some of the other, certainly the other networks that we can take advantage of would be our alumni. And I mean, I know in my particular case, I have a number of alumni who are leading firms and are willing to meet with students and can be a part of that recruiting effort. So I'm with you entirely. It's our students need to see, faces they recognize, and when they do that, it can be an alumni, it can be during those recruiting moments, it can be seeing success later on in the process, and I hope we take advantage of that. We have a pretty good relationship with the profession in our particular school, and I know that's not the case with every school of architecture in the United States in terms of that division between the academy and practice. I guess maybe to get back a little bit to the question, I do think your question is an excellent one, and I don't know if I entirely will answer it entirely, but I think one of the things that really I was impacted by it in terms of the conversations earlier, with just the discussion about the traditions of architectural education that we are continuing to live with and we don't question very much, and that at some point in time we may have, for a number of reasons, some probably more immediate than others, we may end up jettisoning in the next little while. But the culture of studio and the charrette and the all-nighters and the grand tour and study abroad, these are all traditions that continue to create all kinds of economic hardship and barriers for a number of our students. And I'm not saying get rid of all of them, but if we can transform them or find other ways to have those experiences for a number of students, or for the majority of our students, I think, or to transform those experiences for our students, I think we'll be hopefully moving in a better direction.
So I would recommend reading my book, When Ivory Towers Were Black, because it tells what to do. Columbia did it for a very short period of time until they realized they didn't have to do it anymore. But you need the money, because there is a difference. I mean, we're talking about racial diversity, which overlaps with class because of the difference in wealth between black families and white families. So you say one is a stand-in for the other. There has to be money to support students. The whole European tour thing, or certain types of study abroad things, was transformed. People went to Africa rather than to Italy. There was faculty, there were staff, but it only lasted for a very short period of time. But all of the things you need to do, Columbia did it for about 9 years, and they graduated a large cohort of Black and Latino architects and urban planners. It's a very interesting story. I spent 10 years uncovering the story, because what I experienced as a student was not the real thing. Once I read the files, then I got the real story. But I started doing the work because I realized how privileged I was to have gotten my education, that I wanted to know why. And so I tracked down what made it possible for this large group. There were 59 African American and primarily Puerto Rican, some West Indian, Native American students. And 59 that I know about were recruited, and 55 graduated. And of that class, there are 20 licensed architects. So it was a huge success. You can do it. What I worry about is that we are going backwards, because one of the things that enabled that transformation was the social context of the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War, which made people put people in the mood for taking a chance. And we're going absolutely backwards. And diversity now is a much more complicated situation that involves trans, it involves all sorts of other kinds of diversities than it did in the 70s.
And that's my cue. Complicated or complex? That was something, at least, that you brought up, or somebody corrected me. maybe it was John, that I was saying something and you said, well, it's complicated. But we're certainly dealing with a lot of uncertainties here. And I think we cannot talk about accreditation without talking about the profession, because practice and profession are different things. You can practice without being part of the profession. And architecture schools that are accredited programs are part of the profession. I accept that. I am a licensed architect. I know I cannot say that I'm an architect in some states. You know how it goes. So either we accept that or we don't accept it. But can we change the profession from within? Or do we have to step out of the profession to change it? Do we have to step out of the accredited programs to change the accredited programs? Or can we stay in the accredited programs? I read portions of a book by Donna Haraway about trouble in the Anthropocene. Trouble in the Anthropocene. Probably somebody in the audience have read that book by Donna Haraway. Yes. What is that? Okay, thank you. That's right. She has her own, exactly. But what I took from it is we exist in trouble, and after being bombarded by Dr. Sutton's multiple images of the crisis that we're living, the many crises that we're living, the only thing I can say is going back to, okay, there's trouble, let's face it, we need all the voices, all the expertise, all the relational competencies, and the courage to fail many times and not place the head in the sand or put on the VR goggles in the Samsung advertisement of the ostrich. Have you seen that one? Yeah. Where the ostrich can fly? And we're doing that a lot. We're putting on the goggles and flying, and that ostrich is flying high, high. And so, anyway, I think it's important to think about we're dealing with, somebody said in a previous session, enormous volumes of knowledge, and our students were told they have to learn this and they have to learn that, and accreditation and the university. Well, that's the context where we're working, let's face it. And I'm not going to drop the microphone.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to play devil's advocate for a minute because I just can't help it. But I want to stand back for a minute and ask what we're doing better. Because there are issues, it's true, there's no question. But it helps to know some facts about what's happening if you look at the global picture. So the first one is that population is going to stabilize in 2100 and it won't get bigger. Right? So we're going to add 4 billion, and that's about it. And the way that's calculated is because we've stabilized the number of children we're having at 2 billion. And that's stable, that's done. What we're paying for is the 19th century, because it takes 3 generations to play out the increase based on the number of children that people have. So there are a couple things that have changed, and they're big things. Families are smaller. This is a big thing. If you go to a grave in the 19th century, you're going to see a lot of children in the graves. That's not true now. That's just not true. Why has that changed? Because more than 80% of our children are now vaccinated. Vaccination has changed the face of death, mortality rates for children. More than half the world now lives at what is considered the middle class level. Not middle class in the United States. We all, and I mean literally everyone in this room, is at the highest level of living in the world. But the majority is in the middle class now, meaning they have running water and electricity and some form of shelter, and that they have a mode of transportation. That transportation is probably public or it's a bike. But that's a lot better than when you're walking to carry your water and you don't have electricity. So the changes that have been made since really the mid-'60s, it's actually started a lot in the 60s, are pretty significant. The access to health care and to healthy practices, and this is really critical, have changed the rates of mortality for children because we're educating women, because now more than 60% of the women in the world have more than a high school education or a high school education equivalent. That's significant. These numbers are changing the face of the world. Yes, climate is on the rise. This is the environment, is the significant crisis. And it is going to put there is a group of people around the world, the poor, who are going to be subject to that. That's absolutely true. And we do need to deal with that. But I think it helps to understand the things that we're doing better. The one that I always remember is enslavement. Remember, up until 200 years ago, it was okay to enslave people. It still happens today. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's not okay anymore. It's not legal in most of the world. And that's looking back at a 10,000-year history for human beings. So in the last 200 years, think about what we've done. We're able to have this conversation because of those changes. I'm just putting it out there so that they don't think it's a lost cause. It's actually pretty hopeful. And I think you're absolutely spot on about the need to collaborate to get us to the next level. That's the critical issue, is collaborating to get farther. So I'm not saying it's done, but I'm just saying it's not all bad either. We've actually made some pretty significant progress as a species in the last 200 years. And actually in the last 50, it's pretty phenomenal. Just putting it out.
So to build on this question of the idea that we have opportunities in front of us, okay? In the freshman course that Dr. Pearson and I teach, we focus on developing a sense of agency with our first-year students, right? And when I hear that the accreditation criteria, right, are going to basically put everything back onto the programs and say, you have flexibility now how you're going to deal with it. You can just show us one project that brings it all together and we'll be happy, right? So let's brainstorm for just a moment. What would you do given this opportunity, all this flexibility that NAB may allow us, right? And the way we can push back, by the way, is pushing back on NAB, right? And say, trust us for a moment, right? We may have a better handle on how to, from the bottom up, rework and reinvent the profession and what it means. What would you do in this moment? Anyone on the panel, how would you seize the opportunity to rebuild the profession of architecture?
At Hampton, we're doing pretty good things, and that is that somebody was talking about context-based design. So we work with the workshop, with the spaces that are available where we are. And we have accepted that some of the projects will not result in buildings. And that's difficult because we have been acculturated in that projects mean building. They don't even mean site because that's for the landscape architects or for the environmental engineers. So we have a very serious problem of adaptation to sea level rise. And so there's somebody in our school there, and the students, I'm not leading that, but it affects all of us, that are looking at living waterfronts, islands, and in some cases it means not building on the waterfront, which is another, what? We're not building on the waterfront. So it does require some changes in thinking.
Christian.
Yeah, no, I'll jump in. And I guess I'll start off just by saying that so my wife is on the board of directors at the moment at NAB, so and she's been authoring some of these changes, and so in full disclosure. That's what I told her. She told me earlier. If you say anything, you have to say full disclosure. So I'm saying full disclosure, because I know this is on YouTube, right? And we had a little discussion about it earlier in one of our sessions, so I may repeat some of that with the group and the way that we talked about it. For me, the irony of our accreditation visits have always been the fact that one of our flagship programs is Rural Studio, and we do not utilize that program to check the boxes for student performance criteria, because not all of the students that come through our program experience that or have that experience. So, I know there's a number of critiques and conversations that can go on around the work there, and at the same time, but I hope that we're doing good work in a place that has not had the benefit of design services in any degree for decades, if not centuries. So, but I guess part of the interesting discussion about that is, would we turn our entire curriculum into Rural Studio? No, because it's actually incredibly expensive and not very efficient, but we appreciate all that, and we've learned ways of working through those complexities. But at the same time, for me, one of the really interesting things that's starting to emerge is, instead of the boxes that we've checked in the past for things like structures that we teach, but our students probably don't utilize very much in their day-to-day work, I would really personally like to spend a little bit more time talking about professional practice. We cram it into one class. I think all of the things that you were talking about in terms of community engagement and public interest design, these are areas where there's no clear contract, there's no clear way of operating. There could be some sustainable methods, and I don't use that in the environmental term. I mean it in the the sort of financial, like building a sustainable practice that you can continue to work with communities for a long time and have some impact in those communities. So in a strange way, that may be the last thing that students want to hear, right? Like, what are the classes that you'd expand in the area of the curriculum that you'd expand? I mean, I think that is the place for a lot of these discussions, is actually in a kind of refocus on understanding how we're practicing, how we can critique it, how we can develop some methods for, let's say, just giving students some responsibility, some agency, some opportunities within these systems that I think we're always fighting, working against. We're trying to find new methods to operate within.
Well, I think the opportunity that removing the expanding criteria is getting rid of some of the discipline-based learning, that the the formation of the disciplines really encouraged us to see problems through our disciplines. And just, even though it's a much better world and we don't have so many problems to solve, I think that we do need interdisciplinary knowledge, and that one of the great benefits of being at Parsons has been being in this design school and seeing many different ways that designers solve problems where the architecture program is very small, and just having a variety of different ways of addressing a single issue, I think, would be a huge change.
Yeah, I think, and I don't even know how this would look, is that if we could break down, you talk about pro practice being in a class, but making pro practice a part of the project, right? So as we're working on projects, either a community partner, another partner, they're learning all those aspects of the project in the project, right? So we're learning to work with landscape architects. We're bringing urban planning into it. We're doing pro practice. We're doing marketing. We're doing the business side. We're doing the designing. We're doing the structures just as a real project. And if we can be more fluid about that within a project, and that's where it gets tricky, of course, as opposed to we have to do this box, we have to do this. How do we actually make it a part of the learning, active learning, the process of doing as we're doing that? And of course, the other thing that we, like Kawana's class, we talked a lot about empathetic design and stuff, right? So we're talking about how are we learning about other cultures? How are we just learning about the people that are around us? How do we work with them? How do we be respectful? I think that's got to be a big part of this too, moving forward, is we have to learn how to work with each other, truly collaborative, have true respect for them, and do that kind of work.
So the thing that and I don't know if this will make sense, but it's really a shift to systems thinking that I think will move the bar, in the sense that we're not really focused on we shouldn't focus on the product, but the process, basically. And this will allow us to engage with discussions more fluidly in a lot of ways. So stakeholders, all of the things that come to bear on project making would now actually be understood not as separate from the design process itself, but as a part of the systemic culture that goes into making design. So market forces, economic forces, community forces, but also technology and data, right? So it allows us to kind of organize those things, even our history in a funny way, as a set of systems that we would engage in understanding the process of those interactions, and not really focus on, simply the product, right? Because this is really, again, if you kind of look at something like Adobe Suite, right? You used to buy it as a product. Yep, you bought it, CD, inserted it, loaded it, lived on your hard drive. Now you're actually buying a process. So you pay a monthly fee, they're updating it. Software engineers, right, are consistently improving that thing. And you're just partaking of it as a kind of flow, in a way, as that thing's dynamically changing. Yeah, this is the world that we're moving into, and buildings are going to be a part of that too. Buildings are going to be understood more and more as a kind of dynamic condition that need to shift and respond to community changes, to different kinds of pressures, within and without. So I think the faster we can switch to systemic thinking and understanding what we do as a part of a larger set of processes and forces, it'll sort of ripple through the way that we teach and communicate what a building, quote unquote, is. And I love buildings, so I'm not suggesting we're never going to do them. It's just a shift in the way we see them.
Yeah. So you're going to talk about process and product.
So, Dr. Sutton, in your 1991 article, Power, Knowledge, and the Art of Leadership, one of the things that you identified that might help us reinvent studio culture was this idea of embracing research, right? And how to create a broader knowledge base, right? To move beyond architecture, as you just simply suggested. What are examples in your mind that could be applied in the space that NAB may be giving us in the next few years to jump on this opportunity of embracing research, the idea of inquiry in school?
It may already be evolving, in that I think one of the things I wrote that a long time ago, but I think I had in mind that there shouldn't just be one track through architecture, because I could see so many of my diverse students were dropping out of it for various reasons, structure anxiety and data anxiety and other things, that it just didn't suit some of the students who were very talented, who I thought would be great researchers. I thought, if there were more than one degree, you could get started and go in different pathways. And at one time, Daniel Friedman was the dean of the school of the College of, it's now called the College of Built Environments. And I recall he sort of looked at all of our programs and thought how they could not be organized as, master of landscape architecture, but as kind of areas of knowledge that would go together and form this whole, and it shocked the faculty, and he never showed it again. But I think, removing some of the disciplinary boundaries that we've constructed around ourselves would be a way of, and not just becoming more research-based, but having a broader kind of palette for how you solve problems, whether it's through research or through this or through making or through understanding systems, through understanding economic models, that we have much too much narrowly defined ourselves. And in a way, I was thinking more about psychology. That was my model, that psychology at that time, I think, had 52 disciplines. I don't know how many it has now. I've kind of lost touch with that part of myself. But, architecture gave away all of its disciplines. It gave away landscape architecture, gave away urban planning, and is still to this day working to limit interior designers and their abilities. When space is the space people experience inside of places. So I think getting rid of some of those boundaries between disciplines and between areas of expertise, whether it's research or somebody being very good with materials or very good with structures or whatever, or professional practice, would be very beneficial.
So to add, are we talking now about redefining what an architect is?
Well, I've been trying to do that because I want to be an architect. And people say, well, you're not an architect, you're an architecture educator. I want to be an architect. I want my colleagues who are architecture educators to be architects. I mean, why should they not be architects? Because they don't build buildings. Because there may not be so many buildings being built, There are many other built and designed environment problems to solve. And I think if you have a certain skill set, and I don't know how else you would define it, other than you get your continuing education credits and take a licensing exam and get your license renewed. I have no idea how else you would. But it bothers me that some people cannot be an architect because they don't have X, Y, and Z.
So what if we said the fault is ours as educators? Okay, let's not blame NAB or let's not blame anyone else. What if it's our fault? What if we were to say the licensure exam, the ARE, right, is really just a small piece, right, and it exemplifies our ability to detail a building, to design a building, to keep people safe, right, and to promote healthy activities that our clients and communities seek, right, through that structure, right, that we are sealing with our commitment, our ethic. It says, I have proven at this micro scale, I have the ability to ask questions, develop solutions, and formulate them in a way that everyone can enjoy safely, right? Is it not our fault that we haven't been exploring the outer layers of that onion to prove that, to get to that really detailed level of licensed competency, right? If we're talking about competency right now, maybe we need to be just doing a better job teaching all the questions that lead you to become a privileged, right, an empowered and capable problem solver, right? But just at the macro scale, we just happen to be able to also snag that license while we're at it.
Well, and maybe it's not a single license. Maybe there are multiple. Maybe it used to be that if you got up to the number 12, that you qualified. I remember that someplace in my cobwebs of my mind. That if you had 12, you could qualify for the exam. So maybe that you can be an architect if you have 12, and you can choose your 12. That some people, like New York State, does not accept any continuing education credits for professional practice, which is really silly. So people who want to, improve their practice, for example, by learning to be better mentors, building talent, being more diverse, that doesn't count as continuing education in New York State. So like half my credits don't count because that's what I do. You know, that's what I want to learn. So maybe I would be able to count that. You know, maybe my exam, because I had decided that that I was really interested in healthy materials, I could pick that one, and I could pick some other ones and put them to. And if I had 12, I could be a licensed architect, and I wouldn't have to design buildings. I would have to do work in those 12 things. I don't just.
Yeah. So I have concerns about that, if I'm honest, basically, because I do believe in expertise in the end. Yeah, I mean, you stated the same, and I'm thinking that it's so funny. Why do we keep backing away from, hey, you have to know certain things to do certain things? Like,
I totally believe in. I
That makes sense to
absolutely
me.
believe in not only expertise, in excellence. I qualified in the structures. I never do that. That's not my area of excellence. It's not my area of expertise. I would have rather invested my time in learning something that I'm going to do, that I'm going to become excellent in, than in this little, everybody's the same. Everybody has to do the same little bit. I don't think that's expertise.
So, yeah. So, again, I'm going to go back to engineering in this example, right? And most engineering schools have recognized that engineers do a lot of different things, but they pretty much require all of them to take a series of courses that develop a set of skills that qualify as competencies. Now, if you're an electrical engineer, you're probably not going to use the equations for energy most of your life, but you will have been exposed to them, and you will know the math, which is actually the more critical issue, that will enable you to understand, for the most part, the equations that are going to come across your desk. So I think that the idea of us stripping away the math part, just as my metaphor here, from our profession is really dangerous. Because the other part of this equation in terms of research is, in order to sit at the table these days with colleagues in other departments to get grants and funding to partake in what universities recognize as research, we can have the discussion in a more complex way, I agree, or complicated maybe, but in order to sit at the table for research, you definitely have to demonstrate an expertise. And one of the ways that you can do that is by saying, I'm either a registered this or a licensed that, or I have a doctorate in something. I mean, these are the ways that they're going to recognize that you can partake in the math discussion. That's why I'm a little concerned that in order, like, we do know stuff. Like, we do know an equivalent of math, and I'd hate to reduce the evaluation of that in order to simply be able to be more broad, in a sense. I think we can do both.
I
don't
think
we have to
you
give up one
totally
for the other.
have misunderstood
I
what
may
I've
have.
said.
That could be true.
I'm not for throwing out expertise. I'm actually saying the opposite to what you're saying. I'm for more depth and focused depth. For example, architects can't write worth a damn. You know?
That's not true.
Well, just that
I'm just saying
the ones in my classes can't write. And I have a really hard time. And you're not in my class, so don't tell me who's in my class. You've told me a lot of things, but don't tell me what my students can do. I would like my students to be able to be better writers. Some of them are good, have that potential. And it would be great if those students who have that kind of an intellectual focus could develop that ability rather than learning something that deep, that they could learn something that deep. So I'm actually saying the opposite of what you're accusing me of saying. I'm arguing for greater depth in areas of interest, in areas, if architecture schools have the capacity to define learning Students should have the capacity to define their learning, what they want to learn, what they are good at. And I think that that would improve diversity. If you had a school that you could go to and say, I want to learn very deep the relationship between space and culture, a school that specializes in that dimension, I bet you'd have a lot of students who were interested in that dimension. Now, you could say, well, they're not really good at numbers, so they shouldn't be able to be architects. But I think there is a need for people who understand the built environment. The Museum of Modern Art is going to do a whole show on race and space. So, maybe they can get a job on that show, especially if they could write.
I was just going to jump in real quickly because I do think there may be some real simple ways of looking at some of this as well, which is just that I do feel like we've made things really complicated when it comes to architectural education. And, between the check boxes of the student performance criteria and actually a 5-year program, I would say that's actually also probably needs to be questioned. We're still a 5-year BARC program. We use engineering as an example. Most engineering programs are 4 years, which a year and a half is only is core. So really, it's 2.5 years, 2.5 years of engineering classes, and we are still a 5-year program. I'm convinced at my university, if I were to go to the provost office and say I want to start an architecture program, I would be told you can do that, but you have to make it a 4-year program. I would recruit a lot more students if I told them it was a 4-year program, right? You start doing all the math, and you realize, and parents sit in the room and realize that and they say, oh, it's 4 years, and you're like, no, it's 5, and then suddenly, half of the audience is looking the other way. So I think we do need to find some ways to begin to maybe streamline it a little bit. I was interested when you brought up the issue with interior design, that we keep kind of so we constantly tell our interior designers that our profession is more serious or something. I'm not saying that because I believe that. I'm saying it because I hear it. But I actually think, at least at my university, that our interior design program, which is over in human sciences, not in the School of Architecture, is we ignore what they're doing at our own danger, because they've streamlined a lot of things. They sit around tables and talk to each other, not at desks with their earphones in, and they meet for studio 3 hours 2 days a week as opposed to 5 hours 3 days a week, and they've got some really interesting things going on, and they have an internship that's integrated into their program. I like all sorts of things that are going on over there, and if I could sort of modify some of our architectural curriculum, I might model it after some of our peers in another program. So again, and then to the question of research, maybe there is some aspect of expertise which has everything to do with time. I would say that again, I think the example that I'm most familiar with at the moment is that we have simply, thanks to a lot of the work that's been going on out at Rural Studio, we've spent a lot of time developing expertise in housing. We saw a presentation about that yesterday, and that's an expertise that has grown into a number of collaborations with other units and collaborations with other universities, collaborations with forestry, with other departments, business included, and now all of a sudden, we've benefited from a number of federal grants that are beginning to come into the university, and suddenly to organize those grants and figure out how to make those operate within our school has been a real challenge. It's been an interesting opportunity, but it's been a challenge. So I think that
in terms of overhead.
Yeah, in terms of reporting and overhead and spending money on things you can spend money on and things of that sort. So, but it's been really interesting, and that on the one hand is one form of research that I think we're really excited about. But at the same time, I'm also incredibly interested and excited about the research that our faculty are doing when they're out photographing buildings that are about to be torn down, or they're out measuring, some of the same buildings, if they're out doing kind of development research in terms of history and where certain neighborhoods have formed in certain metropolitan regions. All those things are really valuable research as well, even though they're not necessarily funded to the same degree as some of our other research.
So let's not confuse education with training, and we are complicit in the problem. We're complicit. How many conversations I have had in the 30 years that I have been teaching about we need to have more rigor, we need to have more of that. That student that we admitted it from your school in our master program was not very intellectually profound. Look, there are people out there that want to work on what we need to do. They want to study architecture now. We have to make an environment for them to be welcome to study architecture. It is possible that we're asking for too many years in the university. It's so expensive. I mean, every year we add, it's a year that somebody else will not be able to study architecture. And then, if we consider all of these certificates out there, you architects get certificates for fire code expertise, for wind. I mean, there's a whole world of certifications out there that we don't care about, that we don't know about in the schools. And those are the architects that have failed. But those are the architects that are working in building permitting, making sure that the designs follow code, and code is not an imposition. Code is to save health, safety, and welfare, because we say that we know about that stuff. So anyway, there's too many contradictions. We need to clear up our minds.
So shifting gears here, and inviting the beautiful Renegades exhibition back into this room for a moment. When we look at the work of Architecture 273, which is the work that was on this wall, most people don't appreciate the fact that that was the work of an accredited program. Okay? Most people think, it's just crazy stuff, right? This was the work of an professionally accredited program, right? Proof, right, that there is room in a curriculum, right, to allow students to find their own place, right? We've been talking a bit about collaboration as well, right? The ability to share, to exchange, to become comfortable about sharing, making yourself vulnerable, right, to share ideas that you really believe in, knowing that somebody may oppose and reject, right? But together we build, right? This space, this symposium, communities are built together by many, right? Yet, it's only one person that graduates with that certificate. It's one person compiling a portfolio to submit to a firm with the hopes that they'll be hired. It's one person who takes the ARE. How do we balance collaboration with proving you have that expertise individually?
So that's not written in stone. And I mean, that's what exists now. But it's not written in stone. It can change. And, I think it is changing with the way faculty are going up for tenure. You see more faculty articles that are written by 10 people. Who wrote this? How do we give credit for it? So, I think the rules of the game are going to change, and that there are, that you have your individual credential. I don't know how it changes, except that the rules that we have don't seem to be appropriate for the way work is being produced.
But who's licensed, right? We can't crowdsource a license, right? We can't crowdsource a building, because at the end of the day,
somebody takes responsibility.
Somebody has to step forward and say, it's on me.
But I'm a little confused. Maybe I'm just confused, period. But so there's one thing is that an individual can have an achievement. That doesn't negate the need to collaborate. They go together, no? I mean, we should be teaching collaboration.
Yes.
I mean, I think this is the thing. We need to actively teach that at the school. But that doesn't mean that we're going to not then also teach the skills necessary to have licensure or whatever you want. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily the end game for a lot of our students, but we certainly have to act like we're going to teach. We have to give them that skill set to be able to do that. But we also need to teach them to collaborate. We need to teach them to do a lot of things these days, outside of what we might have thought of as the traditional traditional set of courses that they were being offered. I mean, is that what you're asking? I mean, because someone does have to take the license exam. You're right.
Absolutely. But as we assign collaborative projects, right, the reality is we're still going to come back and give each individual a grade.
Right.
Right? So somewhere in there, there's an inherent contradiction.
There is.
Right? How do we address that as faculty?
Again, I mean, every project, cities are collaborative efforts. The bomb was a collaborative effort. Every major project in human civilization is a collaborative effort. And it's not hard to ascribe the individual contribution to that if you're paying attention. So part of what is difficult for you when you first do this in the classroom is learning how to really pay attention to what people are doing. But it's certainly possible to give individuals credit on collaborative projects. I mean, there are a couple strategies for doing it, which is you couple collaboration with leadership. So you empower everyone then in the process to take a leadership role at a certain moment. That's one strategy. I think there are many others. It's certainly not impossible to, I mean, I think it's actually quite, I haven't taught a non-collaborative studio for 10 years. Mm-hmm. Like every studio I teach is collaborative now. And I don't actually teach community design-based stuff. I'm teaching another end of it, which is more applied research. So it's possible, I think, across the entire spectrum of projects to have collaborative work. And I don't find difficulty assessing. It's quite clear what student has done what and what role they've played and what contributions they've made to the project.
And I also think as part of that leadership is peer review, right? And making sure that students are accountable to each other. I've used that in my courses is doing the peer review. How did these people put in the work? Did they do what they said they were going to do? How big of a part did they play? I mean, I think we saw yesterday's session with the Excel spreadsheet and the design build, right, of comments in that, to track that. But you can create that atmosphere where the students are beholden to each other, and that plays into it as well. And it's not just on you as the instructor to do.
Yeah, I don't find it quite so easy. I do use the self-peer evaluation. In fact, I just have collected them and have to calculate them all, maybe even tonight, where, you're looking at how students see themselves on dimensions that they have collectively agreed are important to deliver on, and then how their peers see them. I think my difficulty in giving individual grades in a collaborative setting is seeing how destructive it can be when students start to focus on the grade and not the process of how they're working together. It's easier in the design build because the physicality of the building kind of takes away some of the tension in a more abstract project. But I do find the individual grades to be counterproductive to the idea of collaboration. And I get that in students' evaluation, and it's in the literature that part of the reason that the conflicts arise are people thinking that they could have gotten a better grade if so-and-so hadn't been on my team. Or I don't want so-and-so on my team because that student's not good at X, and diminished what I could have done as an individual. So how you get students to see this idea that everybody contributes something different, and it's the whole that makes the project, and yet assigning individual grades. In the interdisciplinary studio that I taught last semester where there were 4 faculty, we spent, I think we gave up because we couldn't find reasons. We would try to make up a reason for why a student on a team didn't get the same grade as everybody else got. And it was really, we were on a slippery slope, frankly. 4-person teams. And 4 people are on the team, why are they not getting the same grade for the same project? Yeah, some people were better than others.
Okay, so there's can I say? Yeah, there's research on collaboration, and so there's 2 different flavors. One is the one where everybody collaborates on a project, and the other one is when it is a collaborative environment where each person is working on their own, but the work is better out of that collaboration. The research suggests that collaborative work needs to be collaboration worthy, number 1. So sometimes perhaps we ask the students to do work that does not merit the group. And and the other thing is...
Could you say more about that?
Well, work where
30 seconds on that.
We have not structured it. We have not structured it in a way where there's clear what are the individual contributions and what are the collective contributions. We have to structure it. And we also have to, I don't want to say train, to educate the students. We have to develop the students' teamwork skills. And so what happens is perhaps the students that you're getting, they are coming late in their education when they should have been building these, what you're calling relational competencies that are part of that. But they didn't develop them. They get to you and, what's this? I want my grade. So that's an area that we have to develop. We have to work on. Yeah.
So as we shift here to our closing question, and this is a question for every individual in the room who has been paying attention. These privileged 5 are the ones who get to respond. The rest of you hopefully will write it down in your notebooks, right? Name one action item you will take back to your school that has come from this incredible conference. You have 30 seconds per response.
My students are working on, so it's going to be very local immediately. My students just finished writing a reflective, summative essay on the research that they have been doing, design research. So I'm going to go back to them and I'm going to tell them about what I have seen and the discussion we have had and about the renegades. And let's see what they say.
I'll jump in.
Christian.
So we had this discussion at our last faculty meeting, so they're all prepared for this. But we definitely need to have some open discussions about the nature of studio and how we teach it. And as you and I have been talking, we're on the verge of figuring out just how remotely we can do it, as most U.S. Universities are asking this question over the next few months. And but at the same time, there's been an incredible amount of conversation, and I've learned a great deal from the conference just about just being open and having eyes wide open about some of the barriers that are put up within the studio environment intentionally and unintentionally. So we're going to have that conversation, I hope.
Elise?
I was thinking, it's actually something Justin sort of tossed out in one of the discussions we were having. I think it was yesterday, actually. But no, it must have been today in the pedagogy session, which was, kind of looking at biology, right? And he threw out, in biology, you've got geneticists and you've got all these other kinds of practicing biologists, zoologists, right? And they all do have a shared common knowledge of biology, and yet they're doing very, very different things. And I thought, well, that's an interesting way to phrase the generalist, specialist discussion within the academy, right? Because I do think there is a need to value all of the skill sets that our students acquire in the process and then are interested in exploring, right, in that sense. So this, I really do think that we need to address that. In the end, I think they can say I'm a biologist, right? A zoologist is also a biologist, but that I have a specific interest that means that I have developed a specific expertise that I'm going to spend most of my time exploring. So in that sense, I think that that's just being able to have that conversation as a faculty is really important, to get away from the traditional, remembered version of what an architecture education is, which is this kind of broad general education. I think we've got to find a balance between, the common, the math that we share, basically whatever it is, whatever that thing is that we think that we share, versus the ability to become zoologist and microbiologist and all the other things, right? And hybrids that we don't even know. I mean, honestly, that's what's really going to happen, is the new stuff that we can't see yet. So, yeah, I thought it was interesting.
Thank you. Justin.
All right, full disclosure again. So I left the academy in January,
Absolutely.
So I'm back into practice. So what I will do is I'm going to go back and speak with my company, right, my firm, and talk about how do we do this, right? How are we pushing collaborative work? What does this mean at the professional level, and how do we connect that back to the academy? We've started making reconnections to Ball State University and trying to really rethink how we interact with them. That's kind of why I came on board with them. But also, how do we push this practice? How are we pushing cultural identity, cultural competency with a firm like that? So that's what we're going to work on.
Thank you. Sharon.
So I just came in at the tail end here to do the ribbons and bows. But I'll take two things back. One is I'm going to run back and find out what NAB has been doing. I became NAB averse after overexposure. Anything that starts with an N, I don't look at it. So I will go back and try to educate myself on what's going on with the monster. But the other thing is, I think I will go back and put masking tape. I'm going to tape my students' computers closed, and I'm going to run out to the exhibition and take some photographs of those drawings, because I love beautiful drawings. And students can't draw anymore. They just type. I mean, in fact, the handwriting has gotten so bad that I have to require typing because I can't read the handwriting. So I think the drawings in that exhibition are so inspiring. I want to figure out some way to take them back and see if I can get students to do some more hand engagement.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, panelists. I'd like to thank all of you who came and presented in this room or in a session. Well done. And also, again, to circle back to our keynote speakers, Joan Achman, and Sharon Sutton. I'd like to ask the students who helped plan this conference to please stand. Any work? Any of the, right? Excellent job. And then certainly kudos to Professors Cricchio and Dr. Pearson, if you're still here in the room or you're sleeping. Well done. And with that, we close the Schools of Thought Conference, Rethinking Architectural Pedagogies. We thank you all very much. Please travel safely, wash your hands often, and sing happy birthday twice as you wash.